Hi, and welcome to Kane's Top 5 Under 5, the five most important stories in cybersecurity for April 2024. Our first story is about the Security and Exchange Commission's new Section 1C in the 10K. I've now read nearly 3,000 disclosures and recently published my preliminary findings about how companies are disclosing their approach to the cybers. What surprised me most is that even though the SEC only required four topics to be disclosed, the most robust disclosures are covering 11 distinct topics. We don't have time to go through them all here, so we'll have a link in the show notes. I say it surprised me because each of those 11 disclosures needs to be based on facts, not just opinions. And what I'll be looking for in the rest of 2024 is whether or not the SEC Examinations Division starts acting like they're from Missouri, the show me state, and asking companies for evidence of continuous compliance with their disclosures. The other thing I'll be watching for is how the SEC uses disclosures following an 8K disclosing a breach. We previously saw this with ESG disclosure investigations where a mining operation famously claimed to have all the best environmental controls. But then a few hydroelectric dams were breached. And when the SEC asked them to prove they'd had those great environmental controls, it turns out that the ESG disclosures were not accurate. I'm anticipating we'll see a similar examination and enforcement action later this year. Pivoting to the EU, our second story is about two new laws that are rolling out this year. DORA and NIS2 will both be effective by the end of the year, and they also affect companies that sell into the EU. DORA affects financial institutions, while NIS2 is about critical infrastructure. The most important interesting part of NIS2 to me is that the management can't outsource the creation, approval, and maintenance of a risk management framework. I say that's interesting because otherwise we might have had consultancies establishing risk management for companies in the EU. Staying with the EU, our third story is about the topic no one's tired of yet. AI. The EU's Artificial Intelligence Act has been finalized after 5 years of work. I like that the Act defines categories of risks associated with AI systems, and they put some thought into what would be too risky. Trying to guess people's emotions in a classroom, for example, or predictive policing, like in the movie Minority Report, are all in that category of too risky. Lower risk categories see things like making financial decisions, and then things like chatbots. Here's the thing. Being the EU, they have different levels of fines, and I expect that they'll be leaning into fines as this rolls out, similar to their initial approach to GDPR enforcement. If a company violates the EU Act, they could see a fine of up to 7% of their global revenue. On the lower end, providing incorrect information to regulators is limited to just 1.5% of a company's annual revenue. And speaking of incorrect information, our fourth story is about that time the SEC's examination division asked a couple investment advisory companies to provide evidence that they were using AI, and it turned out those companies had just hoped no one would check. The SEC fined them each a small amount, but what matters more is that this is establishing precedent. I've seen a substantial amount of AI related risk management statements in 10Ks. It's going to be interesting to see how, or if, the SEC Examinations Division reviews those risk disclosures. Chief compliance officers need to start thinking about how they'll have adequate and sufficient evidence of their AI related controls related to their risk disclosure statements. Finally, speaking of AI risks, our fifth story is the case of West Technology Group and CX360 against Carl Sundstrom. And I think this is one that many companies didn't have in their risk registers. In essence, the defendant, Mr. Sundstrom, had been using an AI call recording and transcription service for calls with customers. That's something I think a lot of people are doing right now. Where it gets interesting is that Mr. Sundstrom was let go from his job, but the AI call service continued joining calls after his departure date. And because of the often unclear way that AI third party supply chains work, it's not entirely clear who or what had access to the highly proprietary and confidential information that had been discussed on those calls and that was captured in those call transcripts. This is an active case, and I'll be watching the filings to see how it turns out. With that, thanks for watching today, and if you'll be at RSA in May, stop by and say hello.